Okay, simple one today, embodiment practices. What is an embodiment practice and what is the range of embodiment practices out there? There is a whole bunch. I've spent my life exploring them. I've interviewed about 700 embodiment teachers doing different types of practice over the years. I've tried most things and I've certainly mapped them. For those who don't know, my name is Mark Walsh. I run an embodiment coaching training company. One of the things we actually do is send people off to do different embodiment practices. Okay, what is an embodiment practice? It's not just a physical practice, something more than that. So a body practice might be like, say, the gym. Yeah, now we can do those mindfully, so with awareness, so using the body, movement, whatever, with awareness. But an embodiment practice is using the body to build ourselves. So an embodiment perspective is the body is a key part of who we are as human beings. And we can actually build that through embodied practice. So we're building embodiment generally, like being more in our bodies, being more consciously aware of the body, being aware of the body more completely, more deeply, more of the time. It's a nice definition there. More than that, however, we're building certain embodied qualities. So embodied practices come from East and West. They come from different traditions. I'd say there's sort of 7 main traditions. We've got like yoga and meditation, huge area, martial arts, body therapy, improv and theater, a kind of Western somatic practices like Feldenkrais and things like that. Dance practices, that's 6. That's sort of 6 main areas actually. Dance we could subdivide into like partner dance, conscious dance. There's a lot. Actually in my books I've mapped, dozens and dozens and dozens. So how might we think of practices in a useful way? One is simply to ask, does it help me get in my body? If someone's on a treadmill at the gym watching TV, probably not. If there's a community and a culture of awareness around, yes. Now we need to be careful here because sometimes it's sort of affectations of embodiment, like using the yoga voice or speaking very slowly. Yeah, this is an affectation. It's not really a sign that something's more embodied. Sometimes it can be useful to go slow, for example, but not always. So we have to be careful of that, or the sort of trappings of it, like using Eastern words, talking about chakras, or using Pali or Japanese or some other language. These are affectations of embodiment. Again, for historical reasons, right? Like I learned Aikido in a Japanese language. That was great. There's a rich language. It's beautiful, but it doesn't make you more embodied to use Japanese or yoga terminology or whatever. Okay, so key things, helping us get in our bodies, having a culture around that, having an explicit practice of that. The next thing though is like, what embodiment is it building? So there's different maps of this. One map is a skill set map. We say, is it building the embodied skill of, I don't know, self-regulation? Some practices are really big on that. Let's take the martial arts, cold showers maybe is a practice of that. Or is it the embodied practice of self-expression? Right? So certain types of dance or improv, much more expressive, less regulatory, both good, different skill sets. So the tricky thing here is that people tend to pick embodied practices that match their current neurotic trends, their current tendencies. It's just natural. It's like, it fits, right? And that can be beautiful and that can be a good place to start. And, ultimately one thing will branch into many other things. Key thing though, is that actually practices really do stress different things. They develop different skills in this model, or we could say virtues or capabilities, tendencies. They're not the same. And actually people often get quite fundamentalist about their embodied practice. And they say, this is the one true practice to rule them all. This is the only way. Yoga builds everything. And it's like, well, solo yoga probably isn't going to build, say, like more empathy or more leadership skills. Leading the class might, but not as a student. So it's not that yoga is bad, but it is limited in its focus of attention. So every practice has a focus of attention. By definition, if it didn't, it would just be life, right? So what we do in a practice is have a narrowing of our attention, a narrowing of what we're doing, our practice. That's why it's a practice. And as a result, we get an improvement in an area. But also, like by definition, we're excluding stuff, right? So in yoga, for example, you're not talking to people. Little plant there. You're not talking to people. You're not practicing your relational skills. Now, in conscious, let's say, I don't know, tango, you're being relational, but you're still not talking. Okay, and then it's in, say, I don't know, circling or authentic relating. Now we're talking and being relational. It doesn't make it better. It just means that it's broader. Yeah, but for example, in, I don't know, circling or authentic relating, you're not generally physically touching, like in massage, right? Or in martial arts, Aikido, for example. So again, there's still always a narrowing of focus. The narrowing also means there's a limitation of practicality. It's in some way unrealistic. Yeah, so every martial art has rules. It's not a realistic fight. Every practice you can think of as a container. That container defines what the practice is, enables a practice, but also limits the transfer into life. So all embodied practices have a skill set they're developing, which may or may not be useful. Like some of you really need to develop your self-regulation. I did when I was younger. Now it's more like a medium level. I'm like, maybe it's not the thing I want to most work on. Yeah. Okay, so there's the sort of tendency to just do what we already do well, to get better at it, and that's not bad. I think becoming exceptional at something is useful, but it can narrow us in our range, right? So as well as skill sets, building different skill sets, look at my embodied intelligence model. I have a book on that. If you're interested, look at, say, embodiment or working with the body in training and coaching, as well as the embodied intelligence model, which has like 8 different embodied intelligences. We also have a 4 elements model. So we use this model as complementary because it's more talking about tendencies or even virtues. Yeah. So certain practices will be very earthy. Let's take Iyengar yoga, very precise, very exact, very earthy. Beautiful practice. If you're already like that, it might even make you like neurotically OCD controlling. However, for someone a bit chaotic like me, that's a wonderful practice. It's building my range by developing my different capacities. So we're building range, right? Rather than, with embodied practices, rather than say like a pathology model where you say you're broken, this will fix you, I tend to be in the model of awareness, range, and choice, right? So be aware of what your tendency is, build range with different practices, and then you have more behavioral flexibility, i.e. more choice, you know? That would be different from, say, a very watery kind of yoga. So some, I don't know, like yin yoga, or there's some, I've got to be a bit careful with names, like vinyasa says it means flowing, but it's often still quite earthy and form orientated. But, you know, some yogas like genuinely more like gaga dance, you know, very flowing. It's going to build a different embodiment. So both will get you in your body, but in a different way. Fiery yoga, you know, Ashtanga's kind of earth and a lot more fire, more pushing, literally all the chaturangas. You know, some of your rocket yoga is very fast, hard. Again, may or may not be useful. Yeah, I remember, I told the story before, but I went to two yoga classes in central London. It was rocket followed by yin. The exact opposite people should have been doing the classes they were doing. So all the sort of city types came in for rocket, like, right, let's do yoga. And I get it, it feels comfortable and easy. And all the sort of floaty, flowy hippies came in and did yin yoga. And I'm like, you guys should probably swap classes. Yeah, I did both because I'm looking for range and balance. Okay, so where have I not done? Air. Okay, so an air yoga, maybe like acro, maybe more like fun, creative yoga, a bit harder to find. You know, air practices tend to be more like improv, or some martial arts are very creative, like Sistema, for example. Air practices, beautiful, wonderful set of practice. On our courses, like our coaching course, for example, we send people off to a practice. Yeah, we say, great, you do yoga, you do Iyengar yoga, that's beautiful, there's nothing wrong with that. However, maybe learn to dance. Yeah, so both because the culture of dance is different than the culture of yoga. Salsa comes from a different culture, literally on the planet, to yoga, or Japanese martial arts are different from Brazilian martial arts. Totally different culture, like capoeira versus karate, totally different. Technically Okinawan, actually, karate. Totally different cultures though. And then there's the culture within a practice. Yeah, within a practice. So for example, Gaga dance, you know, comes from Israel, but it has a particular culture from the Beersheba dance school. Beautiful place, actually, in Tel Aviv. Okay, so there's the culture around it, there's the physicality that's built through it. We can develop ourselves in this way through embodied practice. The key things that define a practice for me is that it's done consciously to develop yourself. Okay, so it's body awareness, but to develop your being, your embodiment, yourself through the body. Usually there's some community of support around it. It's dedicated, right? So you're not doing it or doing something else. People will say like, oh, my embodied practice is parenting. No, parenting is parenting. Parenting is what I call an application. Why? It's consequential. Your embodied practice should be non-consequential. This is why it's a problem when people get really into looking good at Aikido or dance. It becomes part of their identity, for example, because then it becomes consequential, like it's their living, for example. Like I have to look good as a yoga teacher. The whole point in yoga is like, if you do tree pose and you fall over, it doesn't matter. You know, in martial arts, you're not going to get hopefully seriously hurt if you lose the fight, right? You just tap. lack of consequence, right? So that's the point. Because there's no consequence, you can grow, you can experiment, you can try new things. You're not having to perform. Yeah, it's practice versus performance, or practice versus application. Your marriage is not your practice. That matters. Your kids matter. Your work matters. Yoga doesn't matter. Okay, that's why it's great. If you think yoga matters, you're no longer practicing. Yeah, you're doing something else. So it has to be dedicated so you can really focus on it. Yeah, with your kids, you can't like calibrate it either. You can't be like, be 20% less annoying, please. With yoga, you can stretch 20% more or less. With martial arts, you can say, come on, go a bit faster. Yeah, with weightlifting, even if you made that an embodied practice, you can add more weight to the bar. So the calibration principle, so you can stay in that sweet spot of learning and not be overwhelmed and traumatized, and equally not be just not challenged and not growing. So a sweet spot, right? So a practice has that ability for calibration, which means we can find the learning zone or the sweet spot of growth. Okay, so it's dedicated, non-consequential, there's a calibration issue, hopefully some community, and it's building ourselves. I think that's the main criteria we use. So when people say like surfing is my embodied practice, it's like maybe it doesn't necessarily have the tradition or the culture of martial arts or yoga, but it could be if you had those elements to it, right? Yeah, and one of my books, I've got a graphic which has just got just a huge amount of different practices laid out, and it's kind of ridiculous. So it's yeah, you can see, and there's always more, right? Like as someone who's interviewed hundreds of people, I'm always, there's another Watsu underwater contact Tango. People are always integrating things. New ones are popping up. Often it's just a new brand. Usually it's some American who makes a new brand because they want to sell something. There's nothing really new under the sun. But that being said, there's always cool new formulations. What I would say as well is no one practice is going to be amazing for everyone. So no practice covers everything. It's just impossible. There's too many skills or virtues to develop. I tried to design one once, and it just ends up as sort of a mess or something that just takes a huge amount of time. Yeah. So no one practice covers everything, and no one practice will be perfect for everyone, and no practice will stay perfect for you forever. What do I mean by that? There was a time in my life when I was alcoholic and chaotic, and Japanese martial arts were absolutely perfect for me. Eventually, people would say, oh, you're so disciplined. And I'd be like, wow, where did that come from, right? I built this capacity, and it came from Aikido, right? And I was like, oh, shit, I had to update my identity. It was like weird to be told that. People still tell me that. And I don't think I'm that disciplined. I'm kind of a mess. But okay, I see what you're saying. I've developed that spine, that discipline, that Japanese ethos. But at a certain point, I went, you know what? I'm probably a bit too disciplined. I was 1 minute late for a meeting, and my friend said, I just assumed you died in a car crash or something, right? Like, you're never late, even by 1 minute. I was like, all right, that's probably too rigid. Yeah. So that's when I thought maybe I'd discover other things. I loved Aikido, but I came to realize it doesn't develop every skill, right? I learned to dance tango, and it's much more aesthetic, for example. It's gendered in a particular way that's kind of interesting. And, Aikido, no one cares if you're male or female. It's not relevant. So I explored other things through tango. Yeah, and then conscious dance, blah, blah, blah. I just realized I like to move. I don't always want to be in a martial context because there's a limitation there. And I still love Aikido. It's still a beautiful thing. I still respect it. But my world needed to grow. And I think all people get to a point with their practice where it actually becomes a limitation. And you've often by that point, you're quite invested in it. I looked good doing Aikido when I was a young man. I was dynamic and kind of cool. Not so much when I started dancing tango. I was tripping over my feet, right? I felt awkward when I did other practices. So it's about humility, actually, of letting go of one's first practice, yeah? So if you're watching this, if you're a beginner, just do what you love, dive into something like I did with Aikido, fantastic. But most of you watching this now, like intermediate, you've been around a while, you've done some stuff, you might want to have that humility to go somewhere else, to at least supplement your practice. You can always, kind of do the other thing as well, just because it's a home base and it's comfortable and easy, right? That can be sustaining and nourishing. Now, if you're in a sort of very difficult time in life, you might want to act like a beginner and just do what's nourishing and easy, yeah? But if you're in a growth period, if you've got some capacity, I would recommend having the humility to put down what is just easy and comfortable and makes you look good. We get social status from feedback that's positive, right? And actually try something else. Okay, so there's loads more concern in body practice. It's kind of a specialism, so do feel free to ask any questions. I've devoted my life to this, actually, so really, it's really okay if you want to ask stuff. I'd be happy to help, yeah? So I hope that's a good introduction to embodied practice. Do look at our courses if you want to go into this in more depth.